Okay, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today, co-presented by Blink Networks and Sky Fiber Internet. As you know, the focus topic today is how to utilize the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, and our goal is to provide you with relevant and real-time information in order to assist in getting your communities connected with essential broadband internet. From the Blink side, you'll be hearing from Patrick Boothman, the VP of Sales and Business Development. Terry Jones, Director of Sales Americas, is the primary contact for any questions you might have from this webinar. From the Sky Fiber side, you will hear from Sean Duff, Director of Sales and Marketing, and Melanie McFalls, Tribal Liaison. Just to quickly go over our agenda today, Patrick and Sean will offer a brief background of Blink and Sky Fiber, and then Melanie will discuss some of the key issues that tribes face today, particularly with regards to the lack of connectivity. We'll then talk about what the Blink solution looks like and discuss the many use cases for the 2.5 spectrum that many of you would have been granted the license to using. We'll take you through the next steps and some key timelines and resources, which we hope you find informative. We'll then wrap up with some Q&A, so feel free to share any questions you may have during the presentation via the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll address them after the presentation. Again, we really appreciate you taking your time to join us today, and without delaying further, I'll hand it over to Patrick and to Sean.
Okay, I guess I'll start then. So again, as Mary has indicated, my name is Patrick Boothman. I run sales, marketing, and business development for Blink Networks. Blink, despite being sort of a relatively new name to a lot of the private LTE space, we've actually been in business about 11 years now. We originally got our start building small cell backhaul solutions for some of the largest carriers in the world, including AT&T, America Mobile, and Vodafone. We have since switched to a number of, to focus more on addressing the, honestly, the rural connectivity problem. Realistically, we look at a large percentage of the US population has limited access to good, reliable, competitive broadband solutions. And, we've kind of, in partnership with companies like Sky Fiber, we've decided that, there's a viable market to address this and be able to solve that rural connectivity problem. A couple of other things to note about us at Blink: we're a wholly North American company. Our ownership is based in New Jersey. Our development and R&D is all done out of either Toronto, Canada, or we have some resources also in New Jersey as well. And our sales force and everything is all completely North American based as well. And we even have the ability to manufacture our products, right here in the US of A. So we're fully vertically integrated. We also own all of our own manufacturing facilities as well. So again, we're a 100% vertically integrated company. So thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean from Sky Fiber. I want to thank you for joining us today. A little bit about Sky Fiber. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. And close to 2 decades ago, I moved my family up from the Bay Area to northern Nevada and was looking at a nice little place that I was going to move into. And when I asked the realtor what kind of internet access they had, I was told, well, we have AOL. And if any of you remember that, I kind of cringed coming from the Bay Area and a telecommunications background and immediately saw a need. At the same time, my partner was wiring homes in the Reno area and literally just all of a mile away from downtown. In the same situation, his clientele had no internet access. Again, necessity is the mother of invention. We both came together and formed a plan to provide internet access for rural communities. That was, again, that was almost 17, 18 years ago. Fast forward to today, we've since deployed, fiber connectivity networks across the nation and internationally. We've worked with some of the largest mines, some of the largest companies, that you're obviously very familiar with, self-driving car kind of companies, Google's, Apple's of the world. Recently, over the past couple of years, we've had the pleasure of working with the tribes throughout Nevada on different areas for connectivity, because there was a need there as well. We bring solutions to the tables, and we build networks, and that is really what we do. We're very excited to actually be working with you today and with Blink. With that, I'll pass it on. Melanie?
Thanks, Sean and Patrick. Melanie, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie McFalls. I'm a member of the Walk River Paiute Tribe in Shores, Nevada, and serve as the tribal liaison for Sky Fiber Internet out of Reno, Nevada. I've worked in tribal administration for a number of years, having served as former tribal chairman, tribal council secretary, and currently in tribal taxation and tribal employment rights. I personally have experienced the challenges that tribes face and continue to face in Indian country. COVID has brought many challenges, and one that I personally face has been online and virtual learning for our children. Most tribes struggle with ensuring that their tribal communities have reliable and affordable broadband internet so that they can provide the service needed for their children and to fulfill their educational goals. COVID has also limited us to do in-person meetings, so online has increased as well. These are just a few to name. Blink and Sky Fiber Internet would like to provide you with information to provide you the support that you need to fulfill your requirements for the 2.5 license granted by the FCC. Thank you all for attending, and I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, Melanie. So one of the critical things, you can go to the next slide, Mary. One of the critical things that everybody always talks about from a wireless piece has been, well, it's really twofold: interference, actually threefold: interference, reach, and cost. And, if anybody pays any attention whatsoever to press releases that come out from the FCC or, light reading or, some of the other things, you see the billions and billions of dollars that, companies like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile spend on wireless spectrum. And you think, no wonder the average user cannot use some of this technology because of the fact that it's so prohibitive to get into. So we tend to use things that are, called license exempt or unlicensed, like 5 gigahertz, for example, or 2.4 gigahertz. And we realize that, in an environment which is not challenging from a morphology or terrain perspective, you don't have a lot of, clutter or obstructions, things like that, they can work okay. The challenge also becomes, however, from an interference perspective, is that because these are unlicensed, any family, any business, any individual can use them, and they often do. We pretty much all have, laptops in our homes, desktops in our homes, iPads, tablets, smartphones, connected fridges, connected stoves, all those sort of things, and they end up having, Wi-Fi built in, and all of these things consume resources and consume that available spectrum. And the more of it that gets consumed, whether it's indoors or out, just ends up interfering and putting RF noise into the environment if you're trying to provide actual mission critical type services, such as, distance learning and, remote working, telemedicine or telehealth, and even more, mission critical things such as, emergency services, police, fire, ambulance, et cetera. So really, when we look at the spectrum availability, the 5 gigahertz, there's lots of spectrum available. However, a lot of it is very polluted. There are also some very extreme power restrictions on it. And the underlying technology behind it is not well suited to what we call non-line of sight or NLOS type services. So then you really have kind of two choices. There's the 3.5 gigahertz CBRS spectrum, which just got launched into the US last year and has been taking off quite successfully. However, you guys have a critical advantage because the government has granted, the nation's access to the 2.5 gigahertz band, which has a couple of significant benefits over CBRS. First of which is you guys have a license to use it. It's not something that's shared spectrum with, the U.S. Department of Defense or other incumbents, such as, satellite Earth stations, for example, and ground-based telescopes, some of the others that are using it. So you don't have those same issues of what's called a dynamic protection area or an exclusion zone, things like that. Also, 2.5 gigahertz has higher power limits than CBRS for the same reasons. It's not shared spectrum. So the idea behind, the 2.5 gigahertz band is that you actually have higher radiated power requirements, so you can cover greater distances. Plus the fact that just as the spectrum itself, generally as a rule, the lower in frequency you go, the more coverage you typically can end up getting in terms of both penetrating, the walls of a building, for example, to be able to get to devices inside, as well as just, coverage in general. So if we go to the next slide, we can take a look at some of those things, just a quick map, for example. And without any kind of scale, it's hard to make a lot of real clean, details about it. But if you look, the map on the left is your 5 gigahertz, plot, and you see a lot of areas. There's some areas where it's green, where they have coverage, some areas where it's red, where you might get some signal, but it's pretty poor. And the areas where it's, blank, you don't really have much of anything at all. If you can see on the map on the right, that's actually a much broader coverage area off of a single. This is all based on a single tower, a single access point, a single base station, whatever you wish to call it. And the map on the right, being a 2.5 gigahertz plot over that same territory. I'm not sure if that's a lake. I believe it's a lake in there. The blot in white on the left-hand side. It looks like it's half a mile or a mile away from the base station. I'm not sure what it is in the left-hand side. When we look at the coverage for 2.5, you're actually seeing much, much greater distances in terms of areas that it can cover. Obviously, certain things, certain obstacles are unavoidable. If there's a mountain, you generally have to go around a mountain or through a mountain. It's very hard to broadcast over top of it, for example. But generally, as a rule, 2.5 gigahertz has much better coverage, capacity, and range than your 5 gigahertz solutions do. So that's one advantage from it. Another advantage, and we'll flip to the next slide, is the breadth of the ecosystem that comes along with an LTE-based solution. And LTE stands for long-term evolution, and that's what you'll think of as 4G. And really, it's the next step along the path towards 5G as well. When we talk about 5G type solutions, there really isn't a dramatic difference between what happens in LTE 4G versus 5G. For example, it's basically the same thing with some additional bands added on at a very high level. There are some other elements from a core perspective that apply, and there are larger channel sizes. But generally, as a rule, when we talk about LTE, the advantages over typical, Wi-Fi based deployments or 5 gigahertz, particularly proprietary 5 gigahertz deployments, are the breadth of services and things you can do on the backhaul with it. For example, just the very top, just bridging the digital divide or the digital gap. You can connect communities that you can't otherwise do and connect people that you can't otherwise connect, for example. But one of the other things that you get is you have the ability to prioritize and classify certain services so that you can ensure that mission critical or emergency type services get priority or always have access to be able to do things. So things like, again, emergency services, police, even things like, video service delivery, like online social security things, telehealth, all those things you can prioritize and classify it. All of these capabilities are native to within, the LTE environment. So you have, LTE is not just a radio technology. It's a whole network solution that allows you to classify service, police service in terms of you allow your students, for example, during the school day, you'll only allow them to use school resources, for example, and then after the school day is done, you can allow them to have access to other sites where the kids can go play Fortnite or whatever happens to be the event of the day, for that sort of thing. So you have these ability to do policies across a network that could be completely defined by you guys and allow you to do all this. And all of that is native within the system. You can do this with other networks, but it requires an awful lot of third party and custom development to be able to do that. Within an LT environment, you have these things built in. The notion of policy control and policy routing is all native within the entire solution. The other thing that's great from an ecosystem perspective are the number of devices that are available. So, if you have a recent Apple iPhone or Apple iPad, a number of other tablets, they already support band 41, which is the 2.5 gigahertz access band that you guys have been granted license to. So they have the ability to actually connect iPads and other such devices to be able to do that. So from a distance learning perspective, it's simply a case of, if you wanted to do that, you simply could provide, low-cost iPads with a cellular plan in them and a SIM card, and those students could connect and have access to, their schooling wherever they are within the environment. Because the other advantage that comes with this is all of those mobility type functionalities, roaming, going from one location to another, from one site to another. All of those things, again, are natively inherent into an LT environment. So this is a little bit about some of the things, some of the challenges that we can help solve with an LT environment. Now we'll talk about, some of the stuff we use to actually be able to do that. So really, we have three main product families here at Blink. And the first two are focused on the CBRS band, so we won't spend too much time talking about them, but CBRS may be something of interest to you as well, as an add-on to your, larger 2.5 gigahertz network, for example. But the unit on the left, really quickly, the X300i is it's a small cell. It's basically about a foot tall, weighs less than 10 pounds. It's designed to be either indoor use or outdoor use. So it's the sort of thing you could use, for example, on a university campus or a college campus or a school campus, or in a nation hospital, indoors or outdoors, for physicians, doctors, nurses to stay connected, with a private network that is completely run and controlled by you guys, and not necessarily something that is outsourced from AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile, anything like that. The product in the middle is our compact macro base station. So this is a full power CBRS base station, all included in one. So you've got, three radios, antennas, GPS, all the components that you need to actually build a wireless network contained within one single box. And it's designed to actually be something that's very, easily portable, set up at a tower site, for example, and plug and play, get it up and operational and let it run. It's about the size of a small rollerboard, carry-on suitcase. Again, it's focused on the CBRS 3.5 gigahertz band, not necessarily the 2.5 gigahertz EBS band. On the right-hand side is the big brother, and that's our FW600. And this is the product that is designed and engineered specifically for the band 41, the 2.5 gigahertz band. So this is a product that can be deployed in a number of different configurations, everything from a single radio with multiple antennas connected to cover a large, geographic area, for example, with relatively low density and relatively low cost, or very low cost, actually, to be able to provide connectivity like that, right up to something that could be equivalent to a massive MIMO solution simply by adding modules to it, and you have something that is very scalable and allows you to deploy a network that can support thousands of users off of a single cell site simply by plugging some additional modules into the site and be able to, grow from there. So minimum, operational costs, but allows you to grow very quickly into something if you have a greater take-up rate, or, for example, you start to service a number of students within, one of the colonies or on the reservation itself. You can start to grow some of this, in that area. And it's a full power, compact solution. I don't have the dimensions right in front of me, but we can talk about that. We have the data sheets. We can look those things up if we need to, but it's designed to be a fully self-contained radio paired up with external antennas, and you have very great flexibility in terms of how you deploy. So this is one deployment example here, targeted towards more, dense type of a solutions. And this is our FW600 paired up with what we call our multi-beam antenna. And effectively, this is a solution designed for suburban, denser deployments where you have a large number of users in a concentrated area. So if you have, towns that you want to provide coverage for, and, mobility services for, things like that, where you're expecting a fair number of user count, and you still want high performance to each of those, individual users or devices within the area, you would deploy something like this. But again, this is where the FW600 has a lot of flexibility, because you have the ability to actually, configure it with multiple different antennas, multiple different, systems, and they can all be controlled through software. So again, you can't change an antenna through software, for example, but I can actually, do everything else from a radio perspective completely through the user interface, and simply log in and say, if I want to do double my channel size from one beam to the other and do carrier aggregation, that is simply a software configuration change away, all those kind of things. So we won't go into, too deep into some of the, specifics of how this can be configured. But for example, what we're showing on the screen, every one of these combinations is basically just a software configuration based upon using an existing antenna and existing radio, for example. Of course, when it comes to base station, a network's only as good as both sides of the connection. You need to have, the CPE as well that go along with, that base station. So again, we have a very wide range of CP that are available, both from, very challenging high gain category 6 type devices, which is what's pictured here, that has something that has, lots of, high antenna gain and has the ability to, create reach from a long ways away. We have indoor units, for example, that have, Wi-Fi built in on the inside, and band 41 connectivity out to the rest of the world. So you can have a single low-cost solution that you would deploy to someone's house, and they would have Wi-Fi connectivity within their house. And of course, because it's part of the LTE ecosystem, you have things like, third-party devices, whether it's, iPhones, Android phones, iPads, other various tablets of some sort, even MiFi type devices, things like that. There's a wide breadth of products that are available to enable connectivity to suit the needs of what you want. Even things, commercially, for things like, you can get high security, hardened routers that, for example, could be installed on all of your emergency vehicles, police cars, ambulances, fire trucks, so on and so forth, to enable things like, high-speed video, backhaul or video surveillance from police vehicles, or do things, if you want to be able to set up command and control, from a, particular incident, and you have police cars there, you can, do things like monitor a situation remotely. There's a lot of different things. The use cases are virtually limitless. But the great thing is, from an LTE perspective, from a network connectivity perspective, all those capabilities are there. It's just a matter of, what device we put on the end of it, and the possibilities of what you can do with that network are really, limited only by your own imagination. So I'll turn it over to Sean.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. If we could, now that you have access to the 2.5 spectrum, now what? Actually, if we could go to the next slide real quick, please. Here are some things that we really need you to consider and think about. As Patrick mentioned, the possibilities are almost endless when it comes to connectivity. This is where we would actually be able to help you out and flesh out a deployment plan. What would you like to be able to do, right? Do you want to be able to have, as Patrick mentioned, emergency services, the police, your telemedicine? This is an area that we could help you with. Identify things like the timelines that you want to have them implemented in. Your connectivity, the WAN portion or the internet backbone requirements, right? We would be able to help you flush out those, identify the capacity that would be needed, how to help actually facilitate getting that capacity, that internet bandwidth to the tribe or to a colony or to the organization in general. How would that be deployed therein? Something along the lines of also like tower identification, right? Is one needed? Do you have access to one? And if one is needed, being able to help engineer, acquire, construct, and even down to installation. The ability to pick the right hardware partner. We obviously work with Blink. From the wireless technology is phenomenal, but you need to think a little farther past that one. Core routing would probably be something to think about. A firewall, all the way down to, let's say, a home router, perhaps. Obviously, there are some Blink devices that have built-in Wi-Fi, but if there's areas where you need to think about that one as well, we can help facilitate that, flesh out those ideas. Patrick mentioned, the telemedicine, the ability to have a private LTE network for your clientele. Do they need iPads? Again, just being able to help hone in on what your exact needs are. Budget, of course, is a huge one. Being able to keep you on budget is something that we strive for day in and day out. From a network engineering standpoint, it just goes back to we can help facilitate that if you need that help as well. RF design, Patrick mentioned it on one of the other slides in regards to the coverage that the Tube 5 is available to you and that provides. And don't be alarmed. You can't break the laws of physics. If I drop an apple, it is going to fall on the ground. That being said, the 2.5 does allow you to kind of bend the laws of physics a little bit. So being able to actually have that information that we could provide you is quite beneficial. Not to mention the fact that you own this spectrum. And here's another thing to consider. If you're fortunate enough to say, you're adjacent or butted up against, let's say, a metropolitan area or a highly populated area, as you own this spectrum, technically you have the ability to then provide that outside of the colony, which of course could be a possible revenue source. Again, that's something we could help you flesh out and figure out if that works. Coverage area, again, being able to get a high level view of what you're looking to cover and be able to drill down on that one for you. The EPC, that is called the Evolved Packet Core. I don't want to deep dive too technical on this one because I don't want to scare anybody, but essentially it is the brains, if you will, of the LTE solution, the Blink solution. It provides things like authentication, how the physical transport looks, being able to set up packages for, let's say, the residentials or if there's commercial needs there, how to set up, let's say, that private network that again would allow the police officers to have their own secure network, the medical side to have their own, emergency response could have their own network. It is kind of the whole the whole back ends. Like I said, it is the brains, and it comes in a couple different flavors. One of them is integrated onto the APs. The other one is actually centrally homed, or a server, if you will, that sits on your facility or outside in the cloud. We have done a few deployments. We have our preference. We specifically prefer centrally homed. It allows you to do a couple of other technical details, also allows you to back up a little easier. It gives you the ability to, say, mirror it on a virtual server next to it, meaning that you can migrate if something happens down the road. We like to work close with our partners. We also, as an integrator, we could give you the ability to either work with us, we work with you, or just being able to handle that integration and manage it to a point where we could hand it off down the road to give you the network diagrams and the as-builts, and again, just kind of keep it all available, that it's an option for you if you need to tap additional resources. We are there for you. So we were asked one day, well, why Sky Fiber? Actually, the next slide, and it's pretty simple. We've done it before. We have built networks, again, nationally, both fiber and wireless. We've built networks for now 3 different tribes. We're currently in the middle of a deployment for the Kashaya Band of Pomo on the California coast, deploying their 2.5. We've gone through the engineering construction of their tower. We've gone through all those previous steps, right? Made the deployment plan, timelines, figured out what they needed for the backhaul, what they're looking to do as a tribe, and then build that for them. So yeah, we've done it before. We can help you out. If you have any questions, we are always here to help. Katie, I think you might be next online.
Thanks, Sean. So now that you have the spectrum, and we've kind of gone through, how you could utilize the spectrum, what are the FCC requirements around deploying in this 2.5 spectrum? So here kind of illustrates the different timelines the FCC has set for utilizing the 2.5 spectrum and their deadlines. So by year 2, the tribes, when you have the 2.5 spectrum, you'd have to at least cover, the deployment has to cover at least 50% of your population. Now, it doesn't mean that 50%, you have to have a 50% take rate. It just means that you have to be able to cover 50% of the area that your license, that you receive the license for from the FCC. And then by year 5, you would have to have 80% of the population needs to be covered by year 5. Now, if you do not hit the 50% of the population covered by year 2, then by year 4, the FCC would require this. And then if by year 5, you do not hit 80% of the population covered with the license build out, then you would actually lose your license, which would probably and most likely the FCC then would auction that license off on that 2.5 spectrum off to the highest bidder, a large carrier to build out in that area. So it's really beneficial now that you have the spectrum, especially since it's free to the tribes to utilize, to meet those build out requirements. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to have a 50% take rate or 50% people, signing up for your network or 80% by year 5. It just means that you have to be able to cover that area 50% by year 2 and 80% by year 5. And, with Sky Fiber, they can help you, with the design of that and meet those build out requirements. Next slide, please. And then, like I said, we were mentioning that, the 2.5 spectrum, there is no cost associated with that, but there is a cost associated, obviously, with building out towers, putting up the base stations, the CPEs, building out the network, and everything that goes along with that. So there has been funding set aside specifically for tribes that is tied to broadband and connectivity. So here are some different funding and additional resources that we put together, and this will be included when we send out tomorrow. We'll send out this webinar, but with additional links to this. But one of them is the NTIA Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, and this was part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act at the beginning of 2021. And this is setting aside $1 billion in funding opportunities for tribes that is specifically focused on distance learning, telehealth, digital inclusion efforts, broadband adoption activities, building out, towers and your broadband deployment, and also making sure that current broadband service is not disconnected. So they're putting out $1 billion for this funding. Even if you don't have the 2.5 spectrum, any tribe can apply for this. So maybe you're thinking of, you didn't get 2.5 spectrum, but maybe you want to deploy in CBRS or unlicensed spectrum. You can go after this $1 billion in funding, to build out broadband. So right now, the NTIA, they expect to allow applications to open mid-summer of this year, 2021. And it's probably going to be around a 90-day timeframe that they're saying that you'll be able to apply for this funding. And then once they award you the funding, you would have a year to utilize that funding for build-out requirements. Now, if you are constructing towers, and that takes a lot of time, the NTIA is saying that you probably will be able to apply for additional timing and to utilize that money that is given to you by the NTIA, but they will be coming out with more when the application actually opens. There'll be more requirements that or not requirements, but like an FAQ that they'll come out with. Other areas that you can get, grant funding or additional funds is through the USDA Tribal College Initiative grants. That is tiered towards broadband as well. Also the USDA Connect funds, Reconnect funds, you can also utilize and apply for funding there. But I think the biggest one right now is the NTIA Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, because it's specifically for tribes, and it's all about really connecting the tribes and making sure that the unconnected are connected. A couple links also that we have listed here, and again, these will be sent out tomorrow, and you'll receive these, is any updated releases for the rural tribal window for the 2.5 spectrum is a link there, and then the rural tribal window at fcc.gov. If there's any questions on the 2.5 spectrum that you've received, you can email the FCC there. And I guess now we can open up, see if there's any questions that we can answer for you.
I saw a question earlier come in about the deck being available. The answer is yes, and Katie mentioned that we'll be providing a copy of a recording actually of this webinar, so you'll be able to review everything after today as well. Oops.
Hey everybody, I saw a question come in regards to the coverage around the mountain, or you can't go through the mountain, needs to go around. And the question was, do you find it difficult for the tribes that are surrounded by mountains? And that's a good question, actually. Being in Nevada, we have a lot of Sierra Mountains as well. And the short answer is no. If you're surrounded by mountains, it's not necessarily an issue. But again, that's where an RF design and a coverage area design would come into play. And again, we could easily facilitate and help you with that one. they really are kind of on a case-by-case basis, right? Every terrain's a little different. The demographic is going to be a little bit different across the board, so.
Sorry, guys, I'm having a little trouble here, but we're still on Q&A, so keep the questions coming in.
Oh my, now there is an interesting question. In areas there is no build out where there's no fiber or LTE towers, and I'm assuming that would be cellular, can we integrate satellite to mount the WAN, such as a HughesNet or Viasat? Wow, that is a great question. The short answer would be yes, you could. It is a backhaul internet solution. The longer answer is it would be somewhat detrimental in the fact that the latency portion for a satellite, right? I mean, we're pushing connectivity all the way up to space and then all the way back down and then out to a server and then all the way back. It works in areas. There's ways to what are called MUX or combine multiple satellite solutions or LTE solutions together that might come into play. Would definitely like to speak with you offline with this one and see if there might be a way to get find some way of getting greater bandwidth. Not knowing how much what the demographics looks like, i.e. the population, how many people you're trying to serve. Right, the capacity for a satellite is somewhat limited. Oh, excellent. They're SpaceX beta testers. Yes. Yes. Funny you should mention that. We are doing some beta testing as well for areas for some of our clientele. So would definitely be a better solution using the SpaceX.
I'll jump in here too, Sean. There are a couple of things that you can actually do with the embedded EPC, for example. You can effectively that basically turns the LTE network into a completely standalone network in that particular environment. So you're not as sensitive towards backhaul. Now, again, depending upon what Marty's looking to do, it may be a case of, at that ground, at that Viasat or low Earth SpaceX, Starlink, type station, for example, you may end up saying, okay, there are some resources that we want to offer up here locally. So if you do things like, local servers that, for example, are serving some content or some applications that you want to handle locally, like say, for example, a school. That's potentially a good use case, because you could say, okay, well, the applications, for example, are all running on the school. The backhaul is via Starlink, for example, but the vast majority of the traffic is contained within that walled garden, if you will, and only stuff that needs to go out to the internet would potentially go across Starlink. So there are potentially some use cases that may fit well with that are not quite so latency and backhaul dependent in those particular environments. So it's an interesting one. I think we'd like to have that conversation and see what the use case is and go from there. Any other questions?
Excellent, Marty. Yes, we will talk offline. Patrick, we must have done a phenomenal job of explaining all of this.
Either that or we put everybody to sleep, one of the two.
Oh,
So.
that is a possibility.
Mary, over to you.
Okay. I think we can wrap up. As I mentioned, this is a recording, so you'll have access to this afterwards, and you can easily pass it on to your colleagues and counterparts. So I'm just going to close now by thanking all the participants. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate you, you know, taking your afternoon to listen to us. You'll receive the links tomorrow in an email. So as Katie said, you'll have access to all the resources that she went over today. Again, Terry Jones is your contact for any queries regarding our solutions, as is Sean. Patrick, Sean, Melanie, and Katie, thank you for sharing and presenting your thoughts and information. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email me. My details are in the webinar invitation. So hit reply and I can help you with the deck if you want a copy of that as well. So once again, thank you, and we look forward to connecting with you very soon. Thanks, everybody.